And now, welcome to Part 2. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Part 2 doesn't make any sense if you haven't listened to Part 1, but I'll summarize it anyway. I like a certain YouTube documentary maker. They had a nearby premiere. I attended the premiere, and I had a terrible time. The main reason I had a terrible time is because the film, 17 pages, was not what I was expecting. And as the film ended, I discovered a sort of trick had been played, that we were watching one of two companion films where they were purportedly showing two different sides to a story. And I was furious, because the purpose of a documentary is not to show one side and then have another episode from another side. The purpose of a documentary is to present a situation and let the audience either reach a conclusion or even help them reach a conclusion by doing the maximum effort of intertwining your best ability towards telling an objective truth. It is infantilizing to assume your audience can't make decisions on their own, up to and including that you have an opinion that isn't very good as well. I walked out of the 17 pages premiere and went and watched the original 2 episodes on the Nebula streaming service, which were designed to randomly assign each user account one episode as the first one and the remaining as the second, with the conceit that by coming in with one perspective or another perspective as your first, it would be a case of changing your mind when seeing the second. The creator, Bobby Broccoli, Kevin McKay, is a scientist first, a filmmaker second, even though filmmaking is the main work he does. But it shows that he's got no experience from a storytelling perspective and just a science perspective. In science, you look at a situation from a variety of angles and you provide access to all of those angles, hoping that a greater truth or an objective scientific fact emerges. What is clear from the 17 pages documentary, which is mostly a story about court proceedings and detecting whether or not incompetence can move into the line of fraud intentionally or unintentionally, this approach just doesn't work. But it's unusual to hear me trash another filmmaker so much. And the reason why, I think, is because I went through a lot of this when I was working on the Get Lamp documentary specifically. Because Get Lamp is a story about text adventures, which, on the face of it, sounds like one of the more challenging narratives. How do you turn text adventures into a movie? And the answer is, you kind of don't. You focus on the process of writing, and maybe even the greater nature and truth of the writing process, the relationship of writers to their audience, and hopefully, from all of that, the audience derives a greater knowledge of this unspoken relationship between creator and audience that was a major part of the text adventure story. To be sure, I knew I would be telling the stories of Adventure International or Infocom or even individuals like Lance Miklas or Frank Frid. But I would find that what I was asking of these creators was their thoughts about being writers, about being creators of worlds that others would inhabit, and they would have the illusion, at least, of participation in the telling of the story. Certainly of its order. if not its events. This, for me, was a huge journey, because when GitLamp started out, I was very much dedicated to one of two absolutely ridiculous ideas. One of them I was able to get rid of almost immediately, but the other, well, I ended up making that mistake, although I like to think I minimized it. Let's talk about the second mistake first. I thought it would be really great to have an interactive documentary about interactive adventures. This was stupid. The process of creating a documentary that tells any sort of emotional story gets ruined when people are constantly reaching for their DVD menu buttons to be able to move the story in one place or another. And I would have thrown that idea out entirely, except that I had already had the boxes printed and it mentioned that they were interactive. So I lowered the scope to the minimum amount. There's only one choice that can be made in GitLamp at one point halfway through the story. And in fact, the default, if you put the DVD in, is to play the non-interactive version, the actual linear movie that I created, instead of focusing on this story or another story. This all happened because I really did think that the audience would find this neat, and I certainly liked the challenge. But what I was not doing, and which I ultimately had to do, was put myself in the mind of the people who would be experiencing my movie and try to make them not miserable. That's how I ended up with a single choice. What do you want to do? The other idea I had was even dumber, and I have trouble explaining it to people, which is your number one sign that your idea may need some additional workshopping. If you can't put your idea into very clear language so that everyone experiencing it or talking about it with you can understand what you're going for, it's not fatal, but it's a warning sign. It's a warning sign you should put more care into the process. Let me take another shot at it, and it's very hard to think I'm going to get it right. In my mind, in my vision, you were going to watch a different movie than GitLamp. You were going to watch an adventurer solving puzzles and moving through different locations, tripping off levers and walking through fields and gathering treasure, and all the time around them, either with voiceover or visions on walls or computer monitors or anything else that my adventurer was walking by, the actual GitLamp documentary would be happening. We would be watching a film where we were learning about many of the mechanics of adventure games in the foreground, and in the background we were learning about the idea of them and the creators and workers who put it together. I think there's an interesting idea there, but oh, the budget, and oh, the planning, and oh, the chances it was not going to work. This was my second DVD. My second. Again, doing it basically alone, a one-person crew. And I had it in my mind that I was going to do this incredibly complicated story, one that would definitely require a storyboard, and then overlay with it whatever interviews I could arrange. And one of the main aspects of a documentary is that you reach out to all of the players in a story and ask them if they're willing to come on camera, be visited by a crew, even a crew of one, and asked a whole range of questions, which for some sounds like the worst final test they could ever want to be a part of. And then hopefully take that footage and turn it into something cohesive. And on top of that, I was going to make it interactive? Ridiculous. I'm really glad I never went anywhere near that first idea. that movie was a movie, and people may react to it, but they react to it like a talking head documentary, like a documentary interviewing individuals one after another about a subject. So, having gone through all that, taken that journey, it was natural that I was going to look at 17 pages and be disappointed. I didn't get to see a documentary. I got to see one documentary and a quarter of another documentary, which should have been edited into the first documentary. In a world where online creators create literally 3, 5, 8-hour movies to provide you information about a complicated subject, this could have happened with 17 pages. You could have started out understanding the core of what happened and then pulled around to what other people thought was happening until eventually you ended up, ideally, with all of the information you would need to make a decision. The movie would not have to make a decision for you. And in fact, this movie didn't. Twice. In each episode, it's left up to you to decide what happened. Sort of. With a lot of changed portrayals of people, with selective editing, you are sort of left with two different perspectives. And in a normal film, these would have been edited together, woven into a mosaic, and we would have had a chance to decide on the story. I'm really sad we didn't. But I also know from personal experience how hard, incredibly, excruciatingly hard it is to tell a story with more than one ending. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bighoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, David Fisher, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Joey Mink, Martin, Sembiance, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have supported me and helped me get out of debt. I feel it's important to tell you that Kevin McKay, Bobby Broccoli, has done some truly wonderful documentary works, and they can be viewed online on YouTube and Nebula. They are long, winding stories walking through fraudsters, or the stories of companies, or the stories of personalities, and I feel each time I've come through them richer than how I started. Those works are still there, and I encourage you, I do, to check them out for yourself and come up with your own opinion.